2 summers ago, half my backyard was crabgrass and clover. I dumped money on bottle after bottle of weed killer, and every July the stuff crawled right back, worse than before. Then an old fellow, down my road, runs with the plain folks out past the county line, showed me how to choke those weeds out without a single jug of chemical spray. I did it on my own quarter acre, and the crabgrass hasn't shown its face in 3 seasons. No tank sprayer, no fancy products, costs me about $10 a year. Before I'm done, I'll share the one thing I do every fall that stops crabgrass seed from ever sprouting come spring, and almost nobody around here bothers with it. Here's the truth of it. 2 summers back, near half my backyard was crabgrass and clover, and after 1 season of this routine, the whole thing went solid green. 3 growing seasons later, on my full quarter acre, that crabgrass still hasn't come back, and it ran me about $10 a year to keep it that way. Most folks around here drop $50, sometimes $100 a season on jugs of chemical spray, and the weeds laugh and crawl right back come July. The reason most people lose this fight comes down to one mistake. They chase the weeds they can see instead of fixing what let those weeds move in. Crabgrass and clover only take hold in turf. That's thin, bare, and hungry. Open up the ground and starve the grass, and you're rolling out the welcome mat. Choke that ground out with thick, well-fed grass, and the weeds have nowhere to land. So here's how this goes. I'm going to walk you through 4 steps that choke crabgrass and clover out without a single jug of spray. Step 1 is how you mow, and it's the part nearly everybody gets backwards. Step 2 is a cheap fall feeding that pulls the rug right out from under that clover. Step 3 is patching the bare ground so weeds lose their landing spot. And step 4 is how you water to build the kind of deep, dense turf that crowds them out for good. Then, at the very end, I'll share the one thing I do every fall that stops crabgrass seed from ever sprouting come spring, and almost nobody around here bothers with it. Step 1, raise that mower deck up high. Most folks cut their grass short because they figure it buys them an extra week before they have to mow again. That's the exact thinking that hands your lawn over to crabgrass. I keep my deck set at 3.5 to 4 inches, and I haven't budged from that in years. Here's why it matters so much. Crabgrass seed is a sun lover. It will not sprout in the dark. That little seed sits in the top ½ inch of soil waiting for 2 things: sunlight hitting the dirt and the soil warming up to around 55 to 60 degrees. When you mow tall, those long blades of grass lay a shadow across the ground. The soil underneath stays cool and dark, and that crabgrass seed just sits there all season, never getting the signal to wake up. The old fellow down my road told me his father never once cut grass below the knuckle of his thumb, and the man's lawn was the envy of the township. Now, the failure here, the thing I see in half the yards on my street, is scalping. That's cutting down to 2 inches or shorter, right down to where you can see dirt between the blades. When you scalp a lawn, you bake the soil. The sun pours straight down onto bare ground, it heats up fast, and you've just built crabgrass a greenhouse. Every bare, sunny patch is a nursery for the stuff. So, leave it tall. Within a couple of weeks of raising that deck, you'll feel the difference walking across it barefoot. The ground stays cooler, the lawn looks fuller, almost plush, because those taller blades are standing up and filling in the gaps. That cooler, shaded soil is your first wall against the weeds, and it didn't cost you a dime. Step 2, feed the lawn nitrogen in early fall. This is the step that breaks clover's back, and it's worth understanding why. Because clover is a clever little plant. Clover does something grass can't. It pulls nitrogen right out of the air and feeds itself. That's its whole trick. In a lean, hungry lawn where there's no nitrogen in the soil, clover wins every time because it brought its own lunch. The grass around it is starving and the clover is sitting pretty. So when you see a yard full of clover, What you're really looking at is a lawn that's underfed. The fix isn't to fight the clover. The fix is to feed the grass and take clover's one advantage clean away. Once the soil has plenty of nitrogen, that self-feeding trick stops meaning a thing, and the grass, which grows thicker and faster than clover ever could, starts shouldering it right out of the way. I do my feeding around the first week of September. That's the sweet spot up here in cool season country. The summer heat has broken, the grass is hungry and ready to grow again, and it'll use everything you give it to thicken up before winter. Now, I don't spend big money on this. A bag of cheap composted manure or a generic slow-release nitrogen runs me about $8 to $12, and that one bag covers my needs for the season. That's a good chunk of where my $10 a year figure comes from. Compare that to the $50, $60, even $100 a fellow will drop on bottle after bottle of weed killer and a tank sprayer to put it on with. I buy one cheap bag of feed, and that's the bulk of my whole budget. The old-timers fed their lawns with whatever the farm gave them, manure and compost, and they never owned a sprayer in their lives. There's real wisdom in that thrift. The failure to watch for on this step is feeding too heavy or feeding at the wrong time. If you dump a fast, hot nitrogen on your lawn in the middle of a July scorcher, you'll burn it brown and do more harm than the clover ever did. That's why I wait for the cool of early September and reach for a slow release feed that lets the nitrogen trickle out gently over weeks instead of hitting all at once. Go slow and steady. Within 3 to 4 weeks of that early fall feeding, you'll see the lawn green up darker, almost a deep emerald, and you'll notice the clover starting to thin out and lose its grip. It won't vanish overnight, but it'll be on its way out and the grass will be moving in to take its place. That's the win, and you got it by feeding, not fighting. Now, before I get into the next 2 steps, let me back up for a second on this feeding business, because there's a question I always get. Folks ask me whether they ought to feed in spring instead, and I understand the temptation. Spring is when the lawn looks rough and you want to do something about it. But spring feeding mostly just feeds the weeds along with the grass, and it pushes a flush of soft top growth that doesn't help the roots one bit. Fall feeding is different. In fall, the grass takes that nitrogen and sends it down into the roots, storing up energy for a strong, early green up come spring. The old fellow down my road put it plain. He said you feed in the fall so the lawn wakes up swinging in March. I've found that to be dead on true. My lawn greens up 2, sometimes 3 weeks ahead of my neighbors every single spring, and the only difference is that early September bag of feed. So that's the rhythm. Tall mowing keeps the soil dark and cool so the seed never sprouts. Early fall feeding takes clover's edge away and pushes the grass to crowd it out. 2 steps in and you haven't touched a single chemical. You've spent about $10 and an afternoon and your lawn is already turning the corner. That's the old way, and it works. Before I get to those last 2 steps, let me lean on the fence a minute and tell you where this whole chokeout method came from. Everything I'm walking you through here is one of the old methods I gathered up in my little book, The Old Ways, 50 Forgotten Lawn Secrets from America's Greatest Groundskeepers. Secret number 17 lays out this exact no-spray way to choke out crabgrass and clover, with all the timing spelled out plain. The whole book runs $14.99. You can scan the QR code right there on your screen or head over to GarrySlawnBooks.com and the link is waiting for you. If you're sitting back in your chair watching on the TV, go on and grab your phone now. No rush. Take your time pulling it up. I'll be right here. All right, let's get back to it. Step 3. Overseed the thin and bare spots in early fall. This is the step that fills in the gaps where the weeds have been living. Crabgrass and clover are opportunists. They settle into the bare dirt where your grass gave up, and the only real way to evict them for good is to put grass back in that spot before they can return. I use a cool season seed, and around here that means turf-type tall fescue or Kentucky bluegrass. Both of them love our Midwest weather and stand up to the heat better than the cheap stuff. I put it down at about 4 to 5 pounds for every 1,000 square feet. That's not a guess. That's the rate that gives you a thick stand without wasting seed on the ground. The timing is the part most folks miss. You want to get that seed down between Labor Day and the end of September, when the soil sits right around 50 to 65 degrees. That's the window where seed wakes up fast and roots in before the cold comes. Here's where most people mess up. They toss the seed out on hard, packed dirt and walk away. That seed just sits there on top, dries out, and the birds eat half of it. You've got to scratch up that bare ground first. I take a stiff rake and rough up the top 1/4 inch of soil, sprinkle the seed, then rake it in light so it makes real contact with the dirt. The old fellow down my road calls it tucking the seed in, and that's about right. Seed needs to touch soil to sprout. That's the whole secret of it. When you do it right, those bare patches that used to grow crabgrass every July start filling in with new grass within 2-3 weeks. By the next spring, there's no open ground left for a weed seed to land on. And a weed that's got nowhere to land is a weed that doesn't grow. That's the win you've closed the door the crabgrass was walking through. Step 4, water deep and infrequent. This is the step that builds the kind of turf that crowds weeds out on its own, and it's the one people get backwards more than any other. Most folks set their sprinkler to run a few minutes every single morning. They think they're being good to the lawn. What they're really doing is training the grass to grow lazy, shallow roots that sit right up near the surface. And shallow roots are exactly what crabgrass loves, because crabgrass is a shallow-rooted weed too. You're feeding your enemy. What you want instead is 1 good inch of water a week, put down all at once, maybe split into twice if it's been bone dry, not a daily sprinkle. 1 deep soak. That drives the water down deep into the soil, and the grass roots chase it down 6-8 inches into the ground where the crabgrass can't follow. Now, how do you know you've watered 1 inch? I keep it simple. I set an empty tuna can out on the lawn while the sprinkler runs, and when there's 1 inch of water sitting in the bottom, I'm done. And here's the old-timer trick for checking your work. Push a long screwdriver straight down into the lawn after you water. If it slides in easy to about 6 inches, your soil's moist deep down and you've done it right. If it stops short and you've got to lean on it, you watered shallow and you need to run it longer. The old fellow down my road taught me that screwdriver test 30 years ago, and I still use it every summer. When you water deep like this, you build a lawn with roots like a horse's tail, thick, deep, and tough. That kind of turf grows dense and shoulders the weeds right out. That's the win, and it's the last piece that locks the whole thing together. Now, before I send you off to do this, let me point out the handful of ways folks trip themselves up, because I've made every one of these mistakes myself. The first one is cutting the lawn too short to save yourself a few mowings. I understand the temptation, but when you scalp it down to 2 inches, you bake the soil bare and warm in the sun. And that is the number one reason crabgrass comes marching back every July. The fix is plain. Keep that deck at 3.5 to 4 inches and let the grass shade its own ground. The second mistake is reaching for the spot spray when you see a clump of crabgrass and hitting it with chemical weed killer. The trouble is that spray doesn't stop at the weed. It kills a ring of good grass all around it, and now you've got a bare dead spot, which is the exact open dirt that recedes with crabgrass twice as bad next summer. You've made the problem worse, not better. The fix is to thicken the turf instead of punching holes in it. Never open up bare ground, you'll just have to fight over again. And the third mistake is overseeding too late. I see folks wait until the middle of October because the weather finally cooled off and felt nice to work in, but by then the soil's too cold for that seed to root before the first hard frost knocks it back, and those bare spots sit open and naked all winter long. A welcome mat for every spring weed. The fix is simple. Get your seed down by the end of September while the ground's still warm enough to grow it. Beat the frost, and your seedlings root in strong. Now, I told you at the start I'd share the one thing I do every fall that stops crabgrass seed from ever sprouting come spring, and almost nobody around here bothers with it. Here it is. A couple weeks after I overseed, in the middle to late part of fall, I spread a thin, quarter-inch blanket of finished compost right across the whole lawn. We call that top dressing. I figure about 3/4 of a cubic yard for every 1,000 square feet, and you can buy a bag for around $10 or make it free in your own backyard if you keep a pile going like I do. Here's why it works, and it's the prettiest little trick in the whole routine. Crabgrass seed only sprouts from the very top half-inch of soil, where it can get the light and the warmth it needs to wake up. That's its whole weakness. When you lay a thin layer of compost over the top, you bury that season's dropped crabgrass seed down below that half-inch, too deep to ever see the light, so it never sprouts. You've quietly smothered next year's weeds without lifting a sprayer. And that's not all the compost does. It feeds the soil over winter, so your grass comes up thicker and greener in spring, and that thick spring canopy shades out whatever stray seed did survive. The reason almost nobody does it is honest work. It takes an afternoon with a wheelbarrow and a shovel, spreading it out even, and most folks quit after they rake in their seed. But that one afternoon is exactly why my crabgrass hasn't shown its face in 3 seasons. This is the step that finishes the job for good. That fall compost trick is just one of the old ways I've leaned on for years. And that exact secret Knorr 41, the fall compost and feed. Trick the old groundskeepers swore by, lays out the whole off-season routine step by step in my book, The Old Ways, 50 Forgotten Lawn Secrets from America's Greatest Groundskeepers. There are dozens more honest tricks like it in there. The kind the old fellows passed down on porches instead of selling in a bottle. You can find it over at GarrySlawnBooks.com or scan that QR code right there on your screen. If you're sitting back watching this on the television, go ahead and reach for your phone now and pull that up. No rush at all. Take your time typing it in, and I'll be right here when you get back. So that's how a backyard that was half crabgrass and clover went solid green and stayed that way for 3 growing seasons on about $10 a year and not one jug of spray. That's what the old ways are all about. Simple, cheap, proven methods that work with your lawn instead of fighting it. If you do this fall work right, you'll have a thick stand of turf waiting come spring. And the very next thing to get right is your spring green up, feeding and waking that lawn up the moment the soil warms. I've got a video on that exact routine that picks up right where this one leaves off. So give it a look when you're ready for it. Until then, keep your mower high, your soil fed, and your weeds choked out the honest way. I'll see you out by the fence, neighbor.